I am good.
Okay.
I'm
Welcome.
recording.
Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Ballou. I have the pleasure of chairing the Rhode Island Marine Fishery Council on behalf of DEM Director Coit, and I am going to hereby call this meeting of the council to order. I'd like to begin with some opening remarks pertaining to how this first ever meeting, virtual meeting of the council will be conducted. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, this council meeting, as well as all other public meetings held by DEM, needs to be conducted in a virtual setting. This format provides some very obvious challenges, but it is our really only option for conducting a council meeting at this time. It's important to note that although the purpose and function of this council meeting have not changed, the format for participation will be much different. Staff has worked very hard to create the new process consistent with state guidance on conducting public meetings pursuant to the governor's executive orders. And here are the key procedures that we'll be using this evening. First of all participants, including all council members, will be muted throughout the meeting and can only be unmuted by the meeting facilitators when deemed appropriate. Our meeting facilitators who will be working the dials all evening are Nicole Langiel Costa and John Lake. The second point, all council members are expected to remain visible with their video on throughout the meeting. That's a requirement. In order to ask a question, make a comment, or make a motion, council members must use the raise hand feature. We will then unmute members one at a time to speak. So hopefully you're familiar with that raise hand feature. We're going to be using it a lot tonight, and that'll be the way that we regulate the process of turning the floor to individual council members, as well as the public who may be participating. If I don't state your name, which I think I will in every instance, please make sure you state your name for the record every time you speak. We need to make sure that's clear, particularly for folks who may be calling in to know who's speaking. And then after you've spoken, you can put I think the raise hand signal will go down on its own, but you can also put it down yourself just to make sure it's clear that you no longer have your hand up. The next point, when it is time to go to the council for a motion, all council members will be unmuted. I will call on the first person who states their name, that is someone who wishes to make a motion. As soon as I hear you state your name, I will call upon you. You can make a motion. If there are overlaps, people talking over each other, I'll just do my best to recognize the first voice I hear. And of course, we'll do that for those who wish to second the motion as well. And any council actions, I'll just do my best to regulate the flow in that way. All council votes will be conducted via roll call. So this is different. We don't typically do this, but for this process, we're going to do every vote by roll call. Nicole will be calling the roll every time we're ready for a vote. And of course, when your name is called, just indicate yes or no, depending on your position on the motion. And of course, all council members will be unmuted for those roll calls, and we'll try to move through them as quickly as possible. If any member of the council wishes to seek public input at any time during the meeting, I will open the floor to public comment. For those accessing the meeting via the web, members of the public who wish to comment must indicate by using the raise hand feature. The public will be called upon one by one and unmuted when they are recognized. For those accessing the meeting via phone, I will ask for comments after we run through the folks that are accessing via the web, and you will then be unmuted if you're calling in. And again, I would ask you to state your name, and then I will call upon you, and you'll have the opportunity to address the council. If at any time during the meeting, any council member loses their connection, we will pause the meeting until the connection is restored. So just know that we may have to do that if anybody, for whatever reason, loses their internet connection during the meeting. And if that's you, try to get back online as soon as possible so we can resume the meeting. So Does any member, the first question I'll have before I launch into the agenda is to see if any council member has any question regarding the procedural process that we will be following this evening. If so, please raise your hand. And I have a way of looking here to see if anyone has their hand up. So if you have a question regarding the process, now is the time to raise your hand. I do not see any hands up. And by the way, I've asked John Lake to kind of ride herd throughout this whole meeting. So if I miss a hand that's up, John is going to jump in and indicate that someone has their hand up. So we have a backup for that. I'll do my best to recognize you, but in case I miss you, John's going to be jumping in. Thank you. One last order of business before we jump into the agenda, and that is to identify all council members participating remotely. They are Dave Monty, Travis Barrow, Andy D'Angelo, Katie Egan, Jason Jarvis, Chris Ryan, and Mike Rice. That's everyone on the council except Mike Roderick, who is unable to attend. That means we have a total of 8 members participating, including me, and that means we have a quorum and we're ready to conduct our business. You know that Nicole and John are on standby and will be helping with this meeting. Pete Duhamel as well. We also have from staff Julia Livermore, Scott Olszewski, Dan Costa, and Jason McNamee will be joining shortly. Last but not least, I want to introduce and welcome Joe Lobianco as our legal counsel this evening. He's filling in for Christina, who had a baby just a couple days ago. So we're very appreciative of Joe jumping in as legal counsel for the meeting. He'll be hovering in the background, but be available for any legal matters that come up. With that, I will begin the meeting with item 1 on the agenda, which is the agenda itself. Does any council member have any recommended changes to the agenda? If so, please raise your hand. And I'm wondering if Katie might be wanting to raise her hand at this point. I had a feeling that Katie might be wanting to make an adjustment to the agenda, but there she goes. Katie's hand is up. She should be unmuted, and when she is, Katie, go ahead and make your point. I guess, waiting to see when you're unmuted. I guess we're waiting for staff to, there she goes. Okay.
Just at the end of the meeting, during new business, I'd like to just bring up a couple of just some things about the Shellfish Advisory Panel and concerns that people may be having with the aquaculture application process. So just to keep it on everyone's radar at the end of the meeting, I'd like to have a discussion about that.
Very good. Thank you, Katie. So with Katie's suggestion to add under new business, and that would be item 12 at the end, a review of the aquaculture review process that the SAP undertakes. Are there any other recommended changes to the agenda? If so, raise your hand. Seeing no other hands, is there any objection to approving the agenda as modified? If so, raise your hand. Seeing no hands, the agenda as modified stands approved by consent. And we're on to item 2, which is the minutes from one set of minutes from the council's last meeting held on March 2nd, 2020, just prior to when our world turned upside down. Does any council member have any recommended changes to the meeting minutes? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will now unmute all council members, and I will seek a motion to approve the March 2nd, 2020 minutes. Would anyone like to make that motion as soon as you're all unmuted, which I know staff are working on? I'm going to wait for that to happen. It looks like it's happening. So would any council member like to make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. I think that was Dr. Rice who moved, and is there a second to that?
Second to that, Dave Monty.
Seconded by Dave Monty. So moved by Mike Rice, seconded by Dave Monty to
Sorry, Andy.
approve the minutes of the March 2nd, 2020 meeting of the council. Nicole, could you please call the roll on this vote?
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approve.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Approve.
Jason Jarvis,
Yes.
and Chris Ryan.
Approve.
Thank you. It's unanimous and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. We got through one vote. How about that? Let's see how the rest of the meeting goes. Item 3 on the agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone with us this evening via Zoom from the public who wishes to address the council on any issue that is not on tonight's agenda to do so. At this point, would any member of the public like to address the council on any issue not on tonight's agenda? If so, please raise your hand if you're accessing via the web. And I think I'll ask staff to unmute anyone who might be calling in. And if that's you, please state your name. And this would be the opportunity for public comment for anyone who wishes to make it on any item not on the agenda. I do not see any. Oh, I see one hand raised. Ben Getch, welcome. We'll wait for staff to unmute you and then I'll give you the floor. Go ahead, Ben.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Yes. My name is Ben Getch. I will be taking over very shortly for Dave Butel as Aquaculture Coordinator for the CRMC. And I just wanted to, introduce myself to the council and say I'm looking forward to working with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ben. It's a pleasure to have you with us and welcome aboard. You've got big shoes to fill, but I'm sure you'll live up to the task. Thanks so much. Would anyone else in the public like to address the council? If so, please raise your hand. Or if you're on the phone, please just state your name. I see no hands and I hear no one on the phone. So I'm going to close this agenda item and move on to the next, which is the response to, item 4. Oh, yes, response to public comments offered at the last council meeting. There was one issue brought forward pertaining to horseshoe crab management. I believe John Lake from DEM staff is prepared to address this issue. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bob. Yep, we got a request for some horseshoe crab management, and the division is, right now we are collecting information on how to perform a statewide horseshoe crab assessment. Once we have done that, we will be monitoring horseshoe crab, determining the stock status. After we know that stock status, we will be entertaining management proposals.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions for John on that issue, on this issue? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to item 5. Council recommendations pertaining to proposed regulatory amendments. We have a fairly long list of regulatory issues to move through. Staff has organized them into a presentation that groups together like issues. So we'll try to make this as concise and as efficient as possible. As we typically do, for each issue, we will begin with a staff presentation, followed by the division's recommendation. I will then open the floor to questions from the council. I will then look to the council for a motion. Once moved and seconded, I will open the floor to council discussion on the motion. Once the council has completed its deliberation, I will call for a vote. We will then have that roll call vote and move on to the next issue and follow the same sequence. Because all of these proposed amendments have been the subject of a public hearing, and because there were no public comments received on any item except Whelk minimum size, with that one comment being in the council's packet, I will not be entertaining additional public comment this evening unless any member of the council wishes to take additional public comment. If any council member does wish to do that, please raise your hand after the issue has been presented or after a motion has been made, and I will recognize you and allow that. Again, standard procedure consistent with the council's longstanding policy regarding public comment on issues that have already gone out for public hearing. So with that, let's jump into the first issue, which is the issue of control dates. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be John who's going to lead the process of briefing the council. John?
Thanks, Bob. So what I have here is this is a clarification rule. We are amending the language surrounding 3 of our control dates. The reason why we're doing this is these 3 control dates already exist in rule. They are not being established now, but they just kind of hang out there. They don't say what they're being used for, and that's because they are not being used at this current time. So this rule will clarify that to indicate that the control date has been established and it is for use potentially in the future. And you can see we are doing it for summer flounder, horseshoe crab, and Atlantic rock crab.
Thank you, John. And the division recommendation on these issues is, I assume, to support their adoption?
Yes, this is our proposal.
Very good. Thank you, John. Questions for John from any member of the council? And I have for whatever, oh, there we are. Does any member of the council have a question for John pertaining to this regulatory proposal? If so, please raise your hand. I see Travis Barrow. You're recognized, Travis, and as soon as you're unmuted, you'll have the floor. There you go. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Bob. John, what was the original intent of establishing these dates? I mean, you said they're just they seem like they're orphan dates out there just sitting there now. So I guess why the recommendation to put this added verbiage versus just remove them altogether?
Yeah, sure. So each of these, in some cases, it was part of a fishery management plan, as in the case of Fluke. I think I'm getting that right. But basically, these are the 2 crabs are emerging fisheries, which we put in there as a placeholder, just in case we do have to have some effort controls into the future. We have a period of time to go back and look at participation. You know, the Fluke one was a while ago. I'd have to go back through my notes. I can get back to you on that one. But once again, that would just simply allow us to go back to that date to establish participation and any other controls any other data we need to review to establish controls.
Got it. Thank you. I'm good.
Would any other member? Yes, Jason Jarvis. As soon as you're unmuted, you'll be recognized. And my screen is bouncing. There you go. And then now you're unmuted. Go ahead, Jason.
This has been brought up by a few people, especially on Fluke. A control date of 2010, due to the fact that if it gets implemented and somebody wants to be a new entrant into the fishery, I think control dates are going to eliminate people from a fluke fishery, or potentially any other fishery where a control date is implemented. So, I mean, to just have them as a placeholder, I don't know. It's kind of wishy-washy to have something sitting there as a placeholder that could eliminate somebody's chance of getting into a fishery. When we want to have new entrants and new fisheries and new people into these fisheries, but then we put control dates in. And I mean, this is, for me as a personal experience, I received my lobster trap allocation in 2003 of 100 traps through a lottery. And then in 2003, because of a control date, I lost those 100 traps the same year. So control dates like that could potentially put new people out of a fishery before they get into it, and for numerous reasons. This has been brought up at quite a few meetings. Rhode Island commercial licenses do not carry history. We mirror the feds with everything else, but we do not have history on our licenses, so that when I decide to get out of this business when I'm 102, I'll have no history on my license to transfer. So just something for thought.
I appreciate that comment. These are tough issues, these control dates, because they have no meaning unless or until they're enacted. But I get your point, Jason. You know, having them hanging out there, you know, can make some folks uncomfortable, but rest assured that they have no effectiveness unless or until there is a regulatory proposal to put them into effect. So why are they on the books? It's just for the purpose of having a tool in the toolbox that could potentially be used if the division and the council saw fit at some point in the future to implement a regulation that related to the control date. But I totally get your point, and it's a point well taken. I see Dave Monte's hand is up, so I'll ask staff to unmute Dave, and then he'll have the floor. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, Jason, maybe you could explain, or Bob, how did that happen? How did you get the pots and then lose them the same year? I'm having trouble understanding that. And could that happen today to someone?
Jason, it sounds like it's a question to you based on your representation that you just offered. So we'll unmute Jason and he'll have the floor. Actually, I'm going to suggest that we unmute all the council members. I'd like to try that approach. If staff can do that, I think it'll be easier for our discussion. Right now, I'm waiting for Jason. There. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
So Dave, what happened is in 2003, and I believe this was federal, not state, but the state had offered up a lottery for 100 lobster trap allotment. And at the same time, a control date had been put in that you had to have landings of lobster prior to 2003 in order to get a lobster trap allotment. So I received the license in 2003 and it was taken in 2003 because I had no history of landings.
Right.
I even went through legal with the whole thing and there was nothing they could do about it.
Can that happen today?
I imagine it could. I mean, depending on control dates, and it's one of those things of, again, we talk about mirroring the feds, but the state of Rhode Island doesn't mirror the feds because you could have someone that's been fishing commercially in Rhode Island on a state license for 50 years, but they have zero history that goes with their license. So if someone new buys a license from, say it's a multi-purpose license is purchased by a kid who's 30 years old and the person he buys it from had 20 years of landing Jonah crabs, it doesn't matter because that history doesn't go with the license. So that kid gets a license, he will not be allowed to land Jonah crabs except as a bycatch because there is no history. And it's been brought up by 3 or 4 different people to me. I know Greg Duckworth had brought it up because he didn't even realize there was no history with Rhode Island license.
Could someone from the department respond to that? I mean, is that the way it is? I'm still having a little trouble understanding why that's the case and how to solve it if at all.
I see Scott Olszewski's hand up. Scott, do you want to go ahead and offer some perspective? I thought I saw Scott's hand up. I guess it's down. I'm sorry. I do see Ken Murgo's. Scott, your hand is back up. Do you, if you want to unmute Scott, we can give him the floor. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Great. Sorry, I was trying to fight through the muting. Yeah. So, as for Jason's case, that's kind of a very odd case. That was because we issued these 100 pot licenses just prior to the effort control plan. So in essence, he sort of acquired this allocation right prior to an effort control plan, and the effort control plan used that reference period to allocate traps, and he had no activity. So that's a very odd case. Right now, the trap allocations have been set for the better part of 15 years. So that really couldn't happen again. The one thing I just wanted to note about these control dates is they're already established, and they're established as of the date of the control date. So these aren't retroactive control dates that we're looking to go back and to, keep people out of fisheries. So there's nothing that's been implemented currently. They're already established control dates just being moved in regulation and clarified. So the lobster situation was an ASMFC, Interstate Fishery Management Plan, that the state had to comply with. So it's not likely that somebody could lose traps right now. They are in a transferable trap system where they can move around in participants, but there's no longer other than someone not renewing their license, the option for someone to lose that trap allocation in the history in the lobster fishery. Hope that clarified.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Could you, I'm going to ask staff to put up the slide again that has these regulatory issues on it, because I just want to make sure the council's crystal clear on what is being proposed for consideration right now. And there's the language for each of these already established control dates, and there are 3. The proposal before you tonight is to add the same language for each of these separate control dates that clarifies what they are. And it says that they are established by the department for potential future use and establishing eligibility criteria for future access to the fishery. So my suggestion is that the council consider the appropriateness at this point in time of adding this clarifying language, and then to the extent that there might be interest or concern about the regulatory measure itself, the control date language itself, it could be addressed via a subsequent regulatory action. But again, I just want to remind the council that the control dates are already established. They're not really up for consideration or discussion tonight. What's up for consideration and discussion is this clarifying language to help explain exactly what these dates mean. So with that, I'll go back to the participant screen and see if anyone has their hand up. Dr. Rice, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Bob. I like the idea of just having this clarifying language. Just a standard lay person reading through the rules, it's very unclear just what this control date is all about. And the added sentences make it crystal clear, and that's that.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from the council? If so, please raise your hand. If not, I would entertain a motion at this point, and I see Chris Ryan's hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Bob, I would like to make a motion that we add this clarifying language for these 3 control dates that are in front of us.
Thank you. And I'll look for a second, and as I'm doing that, I'm not sure if we're going to be typing these motions up. I think Nicole is going to try and do that. I know there's a lot of work underway behind the scenes here to work our screens. So we'll see if there's going to be a motion put up on the screen. If not, I'll read it back. But for now, is there a second to the motion by Chris Ryan?
Second, Bob, by Travis Barrio.
Travis Barrow seconds the motion. So we have a motion made and seconded by Chris Ryan, seconded by Travis Barrow to recommend adoption. Here we are. Thank you for this. Now I've got to move my screen so I can read it. Hang on. Here we go. To move to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules regarding existing control dates for commercial summer flounder, horseshoe crab, and Atlantic rock crab. Moved by Mr. Ryan and seconded by Mr. Barrow. Discussion on the motion? Dave Monty, did you want it?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. So everyone, all council members are now unmuted. I'm still going to rely upon that raised hand feature to, when I'm looking essentially as if we were at a meeting and I'm looking to see who has their hand up. So with no other hands up, is the council ready for the question? If so, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll on this motion. Nicole?
Dave Monty,
Approve?
Travis,
Yay.
Andy,
Approved.
Katie,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Approved?
Jason,
Yay.
and Chris Ryan.
Yay.
And the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. We're on to the second issue now, pertaining to recreational cod. And I'll go to John Lake for a brief description of this proposal. John?
Thanks, Bob. So you're going to see cod like this, and then you're going to see some other federal ground fish species to come that I'm going to go through quickly. What we're doing here is last year we attempted to put into regulation that we
I'm not hearing John, but
John, I lost you.
yeah, we lost you, John.
Looks like he's on mute, or was.
Okay, now you're back, John. Somehow you got muted there, but you're back. Go ahead, John.
Nope.
It looks like we lost John.
Oh no.
Okay, let's take a brief hold. I will send John a quick message.
Okay, everyone take a pause.
Okay, he's working on it.
No one ever promised this was going to be a smooth process. The question, Nicole, if you want to, there it is. I'll do my best to pause after each motion is made to make sure we have the language up. I think I'm rushing too fast here. So I will read the motion into the record. It's a motion to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules regarding the recreational cod minimum size and possession limit. Motion by Mr. Monty and seconded by Dr. Rice. Is there any discussion on the motion by any members of the council? Seeing no hands, I'll ask, I assume the council is ready for the question. I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monty,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
I see Travis's hand up, so I assume that might be a yes. For some reason, we're not hearing him.
He looks muted.
Yay.
Oh, there he is. Thank you. Go
there
ahead.
he is. Okay, Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Very good. The motion passes 7-0. It passes unanimously 7-0. We have we have a bundle of issues, 5 that are identical, pertaining to 5 different species, and I'll let John walk us through them. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sure. So similar to what we did with cod, we are doing the same for several of the groundfish species. Basically, what these do not have a minimum size. They just have unlimited possession limits. We are removing the language that you see below, referring to federal permits and state waters, just to simply say that the recreational possession limit for these species is unlimited. And I'm not going to say the same thing for each slide. All the language is the same. We have American plaice. The next one is haddock. The next one is pollock. The next one is yellowtail flounder. Oh, one more, sorry, witch flounder as well. All of these have unlimited possession limits. If any change does take place federally, we will mirror it with our state regulations with a regulatory change.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions for John? Would any member of the council like to make a motion? And we'll bundle all 5 of these species together because the language is identical for them. So it could be one. It should be one motion pertaining to all 5 species. If anyone would like to make that, please raise your hand or just indicate.
I'll make a motion to accept the changes.
Thank you, Jason. Moved by Jason Jarvis. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Katie Egan. So I'll wait for Nicole to get that language up, and then we'll call the roll. Here we go, and I'll read it into the record. The motion is to, just get rid of my, is to move to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules regarding the recreational possession limit for American plaice, haddock, pollock, yellowtail flounder, and witch flounder, moved by Mr. Jarvis and seconded by Ms. Egan. Is there any further council discussion or deliberation on the motion? If not, if the council is ready for the question, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve.
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Okay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. And our next issue is going to involve bluefish. And as soon as it comes up, there it is. John, the floor is yours.
Sure. So this is another clarifying rule. We are simply going to a hard date for our May through for our middle season and our second season of commercial bluefish. Usually in the past, we've used the second Saturday in November and the second Sunday in November as our hinge points. We've actually gone through and clarified our possession limit week definition, allowing us to make this change. Now, if those dates fall in the middle of the week, it's clarified in regulation that you'd still get the full weekly possession limit for those for that time period.
Okay. Thank you, John. Any questions for John? Seeing no hands, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris Ryan, move that we approve the proposed rule clarifying the actual dates of the second and third bluefish season.
Thank you. And I see two hands up for seconds. I'll recognize Andy D'Angelo as the seconder. So we have a motion made by Chris Ryan and seconded by Andy D'Angelo. And it is a motion to recommend to the director adoption. I'm sorry, I have to keep moving my screen here. Adoption of the proposed rules regarding the sub-period dates for the commercial bluefish possession limit. Again, moved by Mr. Ryan and seconded by Mr. D'Angelo. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve.
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. And our next issue pertains to coastal sharks and circle hooks. John?
Yeah, so this, once again, another just a clarification and a move. We have moved the definition of circle hook into our part 1, which is where we have all the definitions. Prior to that, it only existed here in coastal shark. So we are removing the definition from coastal shark. It can now be found in part 1.
Great, thanks. Any questions for John? Seeing no hands, would any member of the council like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the removal of circle hook definition from coastal section.
Thank you. And I see Travis Barrow with his hand up as a second. So thank you. Moved by Dave Monte and seconded by Travis Barrow. And I'll read the motion in just a sec. And that is the motion is to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rule regarding the removal of the circle hook definition from coastal sharks. Moved by Mr. Monte and seconded by Mr. Barrow. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Bob, this is Travis. I have a quick question for
Go
John.
for it. Yep.
So any reason, Nicole, could you be able to go back just one slide? Or,
Yeah, if we get, there we go.
so John, any reason not to remove the word corrodable? I'm just curious why we're leaving an adjective in there. It's really part of the definition. Just curious what your thought was.
Yeah, sure. The corrodable does pertain to the coastal shark plan. We only got rid of the non-offset just because I guess you could still have those stainless steel hook. These shark hooks are supposed to be corrodable because you don't take the hook out of the shark's mouth. You just clip the leader, so they should corrode eventually. That would be my understanding as to why it says corrodable. I don't know if that's appropriate to move into definitions because they do, like I said, there are stainless steel circle hooks out there which are non-corrodable. They wouldn't fit the rule for the shark.
Okay, so that corrodable piece is specific to the coastal sharks.
That's in the coastal park shark plan, yes.
Got it. I'm good. Thanks for that clarification.
Thanks for that question, Travis. Any further discussion or questions from the council on the motion that's before the council? Seeing no hands, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thanks. Approved unanimously 7-0. And next we have a matter pertaining to bycatch. John?
All right, so this is another one. We are doing some clarification here. We are simply updating places in regulation where we have used the word bycatch incorrectly. A bycatch really would pertain more for a species that you would catch and be discarding. For these three instances, it's not. This is more appropriate to be called incidental catch, which would mean it'd be something that you caught and are keeping in addition to what you are targeting. And you can see that the ones we are singling out here are for weak fish, lobster, and surf clam. Nothing has changed about these incidental catch limits.
Understood. So it's just a change of wording, replacing the word bycatch with an incidental catch limit. And it's for the three species. So we're bundling these together for the purposes of the council's review. Are there any questions for John pertaining to this proposal? Seeing no hands, would any member of the council like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to propose this word change from bycatch to incidental catch.
Thank you. Motion made by Dr. Rice, seconded by Chris Ryan. I see Chris Ryan's hand up, so I'll recognize him as the second. So a motion made and seconded, and so here it comes. It's on the screen now, and I'll read it. And gotta do more. There we go. Move to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules regarding changing the phrase bycatch to the phrase incidental catch for three species: weak fish, the Sakonnet River Bay quahog possession limit, and American lobster. Or I should have said three fisheries. Motion made by Dr. Rice and seconded by, I'm sorry, I have to keep moving my screen to see what's behind it. Seconded by Mr. Ryan. Sorry, I was a little, I wasn't as concise as I try to be on this one, but hopefully everyone is clear on the motion and who made it and who seconded it. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Is the council ready for the question? If so,
Hey, Bob, quick question for John. So John, is this purely a clerical thing, or is there something specific about these three fisheries that we're changing the wording here?
No, it's clearly it's only clerical. Basically anything with bycatch we're changing to incidental catch. Just to be very clear, bycatch is a word that's always been difficult to define, but it definitely is thought of more, it's something you did not want to catch and are not keeping. So that's why we're changing it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Travis. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, is the council ready for the question? Appears to be the case. Nicole, please call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. And we're on to Whelk minimum size. For the council's edification, there was a public comment, a significant public comment on this, as well as Shellfish Advisory Panel recommendation. So first I'm going to have John just characterize the two options. I'm then going to ask Katie to provide a quick overview of the Shellfish Advisory Panel's recommendation pertaining to this issue. And then I'll look to the division to offer the division's perspective on their recommendation. So we'll proceed in that sequence and in that order. John, let's begin with a brief overview of the issues.
All right. So you've had Whelk minimum size put before you folks before. It's the division's intent to remove length as a metric for minimum size. We have proposed two minimum size metrics to basically govern the fishery. First one here is width, which you've seen before. We have not changed the minimum size here of width, which is 3 inches. And as you can see, it's a very lengthy regulation. And that is because we were asked, it all kind of started to have a more standard way of how these animals are measured on the water. Anyone who's handled one of these knows that they are not a clear and concise geometric shape. And in fact, width can be very subjective in that when it's lying flat on the measuring board, it's not necessarily the widest part of the animal. That makes it difficult to gauge. There are gauges out there. There's a chute gauge and a ring gauge. Both of them involve some kind of calculation to get to the size of the gauge back to the minimum size, which is not ideal. For us. Also, the chute gauge also takes into account length. You've heard this before, I'll state it again briefly. Length is difficult for us because, once again, it is not only just subject to how it is being laid on the board, but it's also subject to breakage. The breakage can occur on the water or at the dealer, causing compliance issues. Width was one of the single metrics that we are willing to keep out there. With we tried to be very clear and concise as to how it would be measured, hence the long definition here. And then we did take it to workshop, just with the width with our definition. It was not seen as favorable by industry, and we were tasked to go back out to the drawing board. So we did, and we actually took a suggestion we heard at workshop, which was to take another metric that our biologist had measured, which is shell height, and use that as a minimum gauge. So we did go through our data for shell height and compared it to shell width and shell length. And we have determined, so once again, we are not proposing to increase or decrease the minimum size here. We want to calculate a shell height that is comparable to either 5 3/8 shell length or a 3-inch shell width. And what our analysis showed initially is that shell height would be approximately equal to 2 9/32 inches for a shell height. Now, we actually like shell height for 2 reasons. One, there's not as much breakage as concerned with the shell height as it could be with both width and length. So we're not going to have, we'll have fewer of those issues. But also, this is a much more straightforward way to measure and gauge the animal. Fishermen can construct a gauge that will actually measure the actual minimum size here, which is, in this case, 2 9/32. I call it the shelf, but you can make 2 opposing parallel horizontal surfaces, basically a shelf to try to slide the animal under. If it does not fit, it would be considered legal size. But also, our enforcement officers are going to measure it on a measuring board. And it is more conducive to being measured on a measuring board in that you can take the animal and really, push it right up against that measuring board. It does not wobble around like it does for both a width and for a length measurement. And it's just a lot more straightforward as far as to, there's no wiggle room basically for the measurement here.
Thank you, John. Katie, I'm going to ask you to summarize the Shellfish Advisory Panel's review and recommendation on this measure.
Okay. So as the minutes dictate, a motion was made and passed unanimously to keep the current length and width measurement until a more accurate height measurement is developed. A fisherman, Ken Murgo, sent a letter on email and attached a video of him measuring shells, and it shows that the 2 and 9/32 inches corresponds to a larger than 3-inch wide whelk. Tom Angel, who came up with the 2 and 9/32, acknowledged that, and then there was a lengthy discussion about the two species, channeled and knobbed, that are managed together, having a different width and height. And it was recommended that 2 1/4 would be more accurate, but that wasn't voted on. I think probably because it wasn't noticed. So the panel ultimately just voted to keep the status quo until more measuring had been done by Tom. So.
Thank you for that. John, I apologize if you already spoke to this, but having considered the division's perspective and the Shellfish Advisory Panel's perspective and the public comment received, what is the division's position at this point on this measure?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. So yes, we did take the recommendation from the SAP and the public comment to heart. We went back, we reviewed our methodology, which we determined to be correct. However, while doing that, we did go through the data based on both individual species, channeled and knobbed whelk. These two are managed as it's a mixed fishery, so they're managed under the same rule for length. It turns out that the knobbed whelk shell height is smaller in relationship to the shell width. We went through and then calculated individually for each species. Channeled whelk still came out at 2 and 9/32. However, the knobbed whelk, when comparing shell width to shell height, was pretty much, it's just slightly higher, but very, very close to 2 1/4 inch of shell height. So the division, considering that this is managed as a mixed species fishery, would be willing to manage the least common denominator, that is the one with the smaller size, and propose a minimum shell height of 2 1/4 as opposed to 2 and 9/32. I will also say it's a little bit easier on the water, as well as the measuring boards don't always necessarily have a 32nd to them, whereas a quarter is a nice, nice round number to see on the board.
Okay, so we have a bunch of perspectives before the council, and now's the time for questions, comments, and once we work through those, we can entertain a motion. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this issue? If not, would any member of the council like to make a motion on this issue? Dr. Rice?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that 2 1/4 inches on the height be adopted as the limit for whelks.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Andy D'Angelo. So we have a motion made and seconded, and I'll wait for Nicole to get it up, and then we'll entertain council discussion on it. Beautiful, thank you. So we have a motion to recommend. We have a motion to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules to remove both length and width as minimum size metrics for whelk and replace with a minimum shell height of 2 1/4 inches. Motion by Dr. Rice and seconded by Mr. D'Angelo. Discussion on the motion. We're getting a bunch of background noise, so if you think that might be you, you might want to try to mute yourself if you're not talking. Again, I'll ask, does any member of the council have any wish to discuss the motion? If so, raise your hand or speak up. If not, I'll call the question. And if the council is ready for the question, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. I think we have 3 left. The next one pertains to shellfish management areas, and I think this is very straightforward, but I'll let you be the judge of that. John?
Yes, thank you. So this is so this one is also a clarification one. What we've done here is, by way of background, all of our shellfish management areas in regulation right now just have visual reference points, landmarks, if you will, used in the descriptions of how to gauge which area you are in. We've joined into the 21st century. And we are proposing to add latitude and lat and long boundaries to each of the description. That way you not only can use the landmark to determine where you are, but also look at your chart plotter and see where you are based on lat and long. We have not changed any of the actual boundaries, and if only minor changes, if landmarks were gone, I always cite the flagpole in Warwick that no longer exists. So these are lat and long coordinates based on the original shellfish management area boundaries.
Thank you. Questions for John? Would anyone like to make a motion on this? Andy D'Angelo, would you like to move approval?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we add lat and long to the boundaries.
Thank you. And I see Dave Monte's hand up, so I'll call upon him as the seconder. So motion made by Andy D'Angelo and seconded by Dave Monte. And I'll wait for Nicole to put the language up on the screen. Move to recommend to the director adoption. I'm sorry. I can't, my problem is I've got this participant. I know what I can do. Hang on. If I go like that. There we go. Move to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed addition of coordinates to area boundary descriptions for shellfish management areas. Motion by Mr. D'Angelo, seconded by Mr. Monte. Nicole, please call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Chris Ryan,
Yay. Yes.
there we go. Thank you.
I had gotten muted, so sorry about that.
That's okay. We knew there'd be kinks, but we're working through them. So the motion passes unanimously 7-0. Thank you. I think we're doing great so far. There's a lot of technology going on here. So I credit everybody for hanging in there. I'm learning as I go, along with a lot of others. Okay, so that motion passed unanimously. I think we have 2 left. The next one pertains to Jonah crab. John?
Yeah, thank you. This is a fishery management plan adjustment. This section B there was not in our regs, and it's required by the ASMFC fishery management plan. So basically what we're doing here is clarifying what incidental catch is for the Jonah crab fishery. It is 1,000 crabs per vessel. That's always been in there. However, the provision that was not included was that the poundage of the crabs on board cannot exceed that of any other species on board the vessel at all times for a fishing trip. So that is basically making sure that this is an incidental catch limit, not a directed 1,000 crab fishery, based on having some small amount of other species on the vessel. You have to have more of the other species on the vessel to get up to the 1,000 crabs.
And John, I think you said this, but I just want to make sure it's clear. Is this a compliance issue? That is to say, a requirement for Rhode Island to adopt this to be consistent with the ASMFC's plan or federal plan?
That is correct. It is a compliance issue.
Thank you for that. Questions for John on this regulatory proposal? Seeing no hands, would anyone like to make a motion pertaining to this?
I'll make a motion to correct the rules for commercial Jonah crabs consistent with the fisheries management plan.
Thank you, Dave. Motion by Dave and seconded by Dr. Rice. I'll wait for Nicole to put the motion up on the screen, and then we'll call the roll. Move to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules for Jonah crab to be consistent with the FMP. Motion by Mr. Monty and seconded by Dr. Rice. Nicole, please call the roll.
Dave Monty,
Approve.
Travis Barrow,
Approve.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approve.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
There she is.
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Approved.
Jason Jarvis,
Approved.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. And we're on to our last issue, the summer flounder exemption certificate. John.
Okay, thank you. So this one is coming about as a request from industry in one of our workshops. We were approached to re-examine our fluke exemption certificate rules and regs and maybe make some changes to them pertaining to how they relate to a vessel. So the division took this into consideration and is moving forward with it. By way of background, the certificate was created back in the 90s, and one of the provisions that was not in that original regulation was one for renewal or for when a certificate expires. So in order to make any changes to the certificate program, we need to know what our universe is, basically how many certificates are out there. Rules do exist right now that validate or invalidate certificates. What we are proposing in what we are calling phase 1 of the process is to basically get a handle on this universe. We are proposing that all of the certificates that are out there need to be renewed this year. We would establish the date of July 1st, 2020 as when we notify all of the current certificate holders to renew their applications. They would have until September 1st, 2020 to send in their renewals. At that point, we would be able to go through and determine whether these certificates are valid or invalid. Several things could result in a certificate becoming invalid, such as an improper vessel transfer or a change in federal permit status, such as dropping it or splitting it off or selling the permit separate from the boat. We also want to clarify the fluke certificate has always been to a vessel. However, in the past, there is a lot of confusion surrounding that. This definitely codifies that these certificates go to the vessel. Once we go through and we determine which certificates and which are invalid and which are valid, we can utilize our existing appeals process. We do have an environmental court within DEM, AAD we call it. So we do have a mechanism for people to address whether, if they are deemed invalid and they feel that's inappropriate, we do have a mechanism there for the appeal process. Once we establish the annual then phase 2 will come at the end of the year here. You'll see us addressing some of the asks that were made by industry in relative to this certificate. And then at that point, it will be a requirement to have an annual renewal period. However, depending on how, after we get through this first phase, we will entertain some discussion in the fall, whether or not that needs to be annual. Does it have to be 2 years? Does it have to be 3 years? We really don't know yet because we need to know how many people are out there and determine what type of flexibility industry is looking for. So the bottom line is this is starting a multi-phase process to modernize our certificates. This is just making everyone renew them.
Thank you, John. Questions for John regarding this phase 1 of the Summer Flounder Exemption Certificate Program Reform Initiative is what I would call it. Seeing no hands, would anyone from the council like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the Summer Flounder Exemption Certificate Program, the proposed phase 1 as outlined.
Thank you. And I see Andy D'Angelo with his hand up as a second. Jason, I think I saw you trying to put your hand up. I'm looking at the feature here, the raise hand feature. If you don't mind using that, I don't want to gloss over you. I'm not looking at your video. I'm looking at the raise hand feature. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on. So the motion before the council is to recommend to the director adoption of the proposed rules for a summer flounder exemption certificate renewal process. Motion made by Mr. Monti and seconded by Mr. D'Angelo. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monti,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously 7-0, and I think that completes this agenda item. Is that true, John?
Yes, it does.
Very good. John, if you could unmute Brennan Bika, who I see on the participant list, and I'm going to invite Brennan in a moment here to potentially turn on his video as well. He'll be unmuted so we can introduce and offer him the floor. This is agenda item 6. It is the recommendation or proposal to appoint Brennan Bika to the Shellfish Advisory Panel. I do believe Brennan is in attendance at this meeting. I see his name, and I think we have him coming up on video. And I think he's unmuted. There you are.
Is it working?
There you are.
How you doing?
Very good. Welcome. I want to give you the floor, Brennan, to introduce yourself and offer a minute or so of introduction, please.
Yeah, no problem. So, hello everyone. My name is Brennan Bika. I run the Bella Vista Shellfish buy shop down in Warwick, Oakland Beach. Katie mentioned this board to me, and just with all talk of this new area, I'd really like to get a say in what really goes on here. I think a dealer's say is very important with opening this new area and just future decisions that you guys have to make. I think I have a large say, seeing that I sell strictly to Marsh Seafood, and all my product is going in and out, and Marsh Seafood is technically, well, not technically, but could be said to be one of the largest distributors of shellfish in Rhode Island. So I feel like it would have important to have me and have Marsh Seafood have a say on this board to see whether this area opening in other areas, or just some help with trying to figure out where the product can go, if I'm able to move it, if other people will be able to move it. It's just a little more insight into more of the wholesale area. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you so much for your interest and for your nomination, for submitting your nomination. Would anyone on the council like to make a motion regarding the appointment of Brennan Bika to the Shellfish Advisory Panel? Dr. Rice moves approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Katie Egan. Moved by Dr. Rice and seconded by Katie Egan to appoint Brennan Bika to the Shellfish Advisory Panel. Nicole, could you please call the roll?
Dave Monte,
Approve?
Travis Barrow,
I see your hand up, Travis, but we need an audio.
I think he's muted.
Yeah,
I think he is muted.
And I know I can't unmute myself, so I don't think he can unmute himself either.
Oh, okay. So we'll need to try to unmute Travis, although he is indicating yay. There he is.
Yay, thank you.
Yay. Go ahead, Nicole.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The nomination is approved unanimously. Congratulations, Brendan, and welcome. We look forward to your input and
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I'd love to do anything I can to help.
well, thank you. And thanks for being part of this meeting. So we'll now mute you and we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is item 7. And that would be the Shellfish Advisory Panel meeting minutes from April 29 and May 27. The minutes are before the council. We've already considered one issue that was addressed at one of those meetings, and that is the Whelk minimum size. We will also be taking up 2 other issues addressed at those meetings in our next 2 agenda items. So with that said, I'll look to Katie to see if she wishes to offer anything else regarding the 2 meetings that were held that she chaired. Katie?
Yeah, so the SAB met on 2 occasions. We took on issues regarding oyster farms and other shellfish harvest areas. I think the minutes accurately reflect the meetings. So that being said, there are two oyster farms that were unanimously not objected to, both in the West Passage off of Rome Point. And while they were unanimously not objected to, there was concern, and the panel wanted me to bring to the council their concern of the high-profile floating gear that will be used on these 2 farms. So just keep in mind that there will be high-profile gear in these at these 2 locations. The areas are used for fishing around the areas, but not specifically within the farms, which are already approved. They're just mostly changing their gear type to a more high-profile floating cage. So there was just some concern about that, and I told them I would bring it back to the panel. But otherwise, the minutes accurately reflect, and I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Yes.
Seconded by Dave Monte. So moved by Katie Egan and seconded by Dave Monte to adopt the minutes from the 2 Shellfish Advisory Panel meetings. Before we call the roll on that, does any member of the council have any questions for Katie on any of the issues discussed at the meetings? Again, recognizing we're about to take up 2 that are on our agenda. Seeing no hands, I'll ask Nicole to, actually, let's do it this way. Is there any objection to approving the meeting minutes for those 2 meetings? If you object, raise your hand. Seeing no hands, the meeting minutes stand approved by consent. And we're on to the next agenda item, which is an aquaculture lease proposal before the full council for final consideration and recommendation to the CRMC is a kelp farm proposal just south of Napatree Point in Westerly. I'd like to start with the applicant or Ben Getch, who I know is with us from the CRMC, to summarize the proposal as it currently stands and as may be modified. Then I'd like to, again, offer the opportunity to address the council. I'd then like to turn the floor over to Katie Egan to summarize the Shellfish Advisory Panel's review and recommendation on the proposal. And then I'll invite any members of the public who may wish to address the council on this matter to do so. And then we'll bring it back to the council for a motion and a discussion and vote. So we'll start out with, Ben, would you like to address the proposal or on behalf of the applicant?
I don't know if Andrew is on the line. Is he here? If he wants to speak to it, he surely is welcome to.
Let me see if we have Mr. McAndrew. I don't see Mr. McAndrew listed on the participant list, but he could be calling in. Not sure how we would know that. Why don't you go ahead, Ben, and go ahead and just, if you could, just speak to the proposal as you understand it, as it's before the council this evening, and then I'll give Mr. McAndrew another shot if we can figure out how to, if he's on, figure out how to allow him to speak. But why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. With the caveat right now that I just started the position recently, so I have not been with this application through its beginning. But what I believe is being proposed here by Mr. McAndrew is a 10-acre kelp farm to be operated seasonally. I do have the application here, but it's there was some concern about a potential modification to this application as the SAP heard it. That was a alternate proposal that was submitted, which was to change the anchoring system from using block anchors to using helix anchors, and that would be 3 per long line. And he also alternatively proposed to use thicker line and some chains instead of sinking line. Really, the applicant has responded to concerns expressed by staff of the anchoring system for this area. It is a bit of a high energy area with the prevailing winds there from the south, and based on some new technological presentations that were given at the NACE seminar last year, it seems like a helix system anchor would be less prone to move. There is one other aquaculturist, an oyster farmer, who uses similar helix anchors, and he's probably the only farm that shows no movement at all. The alternatively to use a block anchor for this kind of application, you're looking at like 4,000-pound blocks. It's probably what would be appropriate. So the application will reach the council as it is now, and it will be that the council has the ability to stipulate or to accept the alternative layout with the helix anchors as part of the assent. This is just a small tweak in the engineering of the project. Other than that, the nature and substance of the operation is all the same.
Great, thanks, Ben. I'm going to ask John if you can you unmute everyone who is on this that is calling in or on this meeting, and I'm going to just see if Mr. McAndrew is out there. So let's unmute everyone for just a moment, if that can be done in one fell swoop.
It is done.
Okay, Mr. McAndrew, are you out there? Don't hear him, so I'm going to assume he's not, so you can go ahead and mute everyone again, other than the council members. And at this point, I'll go to Katie Egan to provide a summary of the Shellfish Advisory Panel's review of this proposal.
Okay, so as is stated in the minutes, the motion was made to object to this. Sorry, I'll start again. So it is, as stated in the minutes, the motion was made and passed unanimously to object to this application because it is commercially utilized for pot fishing throughout the year. Although this is a seasonal lease, the seasons will overlap. Therefore, it is not consistent with competing uses engaged in marine fisheries. The new anchor system would not, I don't believe the new anchor system would result in a significant change to that motion. So.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to now go to the public. I'm sorry, Ben, did you want to respond? And if so, we'll need to unmute you. It looks like Ben would like to weigh in. Ben Getch. As soon as you're unmuted, I'll give you the floor. Hang on a sec, Ben. We're still waiting to get, there you go. Now you're.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify the dates for the seasonal operation. He's proposing installation of the gear November 1st and all removal of the gear by April 30th.
Thank you for that clarification, Ben. So that clarifies the seasonality of the proposal. At this point, I'm going to see if there are any members of the public that would like to address the council on this issue. I see one hand up so far, Mr. I hope I'm saying your name right, Josiah Dodge. If so, please unmute Josiah Dodge, and we'll give him the opportunity to comment as soon as you're on. There you go, Josiah. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bob. And you did actually pronounce it right. Thank you. I was actually the person that spoke up at the last meeting about this proposed kelp farm, its location, and the conflicts of gear. Again, I have nothing against aquaculture. What I do have something against is you're going to take an area that multiple fisheries use and lease it to somebody who's going to shut us out. Anybody that can look in safest, as John Lake can probably tell you, I have landings from December. I lobster fish in there. I know of 3 or 4 people that conch in there from November to April. It's South County's kind of weird little protected area inside the reef. Sometimes we can get there when it's not too horrible in the winter. That's why I spoke up against this, because it doesn't seem that the other fishermen in the area realize the impact it's going to have. Somebody pointed out that it's just the little box inside the big box. That's great, but that's still predominantly an area right outside the channel in between Napatree and the actual like cove of Watchhill Lighthouse. People set conch gear. I know I set lobster pots in there in the winter. I don't think there was ever due diligence really done to look into the conflict with the fisheries. The anchor type isn't going to resolve that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all the same. It's you're locking people out of an area to fish, and it's not right. And there's guys that have been down there forever doing this. It's not just me who just got into it, you know? So.
Understood. Thank you, Josiah. I see Pete August's hand up. Pete, welcome. And as soon as you're unmuted, I'll give you the floor. We'll wait for staff to do that. Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Pete.
Thanks, Bob, for giving me an opportunity. I have a couple of simple questions that maybe somebody in the council can help me understand. Question 1, with a proposed new anchoring system, there's going to be 1,200 linear feet of chain under the footprint of the kelp farm. Will that have any significant impact to the benthic habitat quality of the site? Number 2, having all that chain on the seafloor when after the kelp harvest system, is that going to be a hazard for recreational and commercial fishermen? And my last question, and then I'll mute myself, is the kelp farm sits within NOAA essential fish habitat for 20 different species as of a couple of days ago. And I'm very curious to know if that's a significant issue too. So anybody who might have an opinion or a comment on these, I thank you in advance for clarifying this for me.
Thank you, Pete, for bringing those questions forward. And after I see if there are any other members of the public that would like to speak on this issue, I'm going to bring it back to Ben and then, of course, to the council. So for right now, I'm just looking for comments from the public, and I do see Jeff with his hand up, and so I'll wait for staff to unmute Jeff, and then you'll have the floor. Hang tight. There you go. Jeff, the floor is yours.
I'm just as Jeff. I'm Jeff Gardner. I'm a member of the SAP. I just had to step out, so I missed some of this. But I have this question, the process of the way this application is moving forward. We had a SAP meeting about this. It went through the regular aquaculture process, and now I read that they have altered in a major way their application to CRMC, and through CRMC, the SAP and the Marine Fisheries Council. And I personally feel that this should go back to maybe the start of the whole process, because this is not now a seasonal application. It appears to me that it will be an influential 12-month of the year application, and I'm wondering if that should also increase the performance bond that's required upon the individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. I'm writing these questions and comments down, and we'll give Ben and others a chance to respond when we complete the public comment portion of this meeting. Next up, I have Jenny Kilburn. If staff could unmute Jenny Kilburn, we'll look to, go ahead, Jenny. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone. I'm a game bird biologist with DEM Fish and Wildlife. I just wanted to reiterate our concerns that this application would have for its impacts on waterfowl. As we've said in the past, this area is a globally important bird area, and it's designated by that by Audubon Society, and that is the highest distinction a site can have in terms of abundance and diversity of birds, especially threatened species. This area is also used by sea ducks such as common eider, black scoter, and white-winged scoter, as well as loons, and all four of those species have been studied through the University of Rhode Island, and in conjunction with Rhode Island DEM. We've had transmitters on birds and been able to track locations, and this area comes up as an important area for all of those species. And in general, there's a concern for sea duck populations as a whole. They've been declining, and it's unclear specifically what that direct cause might be, but one of them is changing food sources. An aquaculture site like this, in an area that's so important for these species, would essentially be taking habitat and taking food from these species.
Thank you, Jenny, for that input. Would any other member of the public like to comment on this application? Seeing no hands, I will go to Ben first to see if Ben would like to respond to any of the comments that have been offered during the public comment portion of this meeting. It's up to you.
Yeah, well, for one, this is the fisheries consultation process of the application review. So this is where we, try to suss out, any potential conflicts with fisheries. So I appreciate the comments from the fishermen. As far as, this being a new application, it is the CRMC's opinion that the change in anchoring is not a substantive change enough to warrant a full new application. It is true you can't change your application once it's been submitted and accepted by the CRMC, but you can, and applicants do often submit alternative proposals. And those don't change your application, but during review by the council can be accepted, as well as the council can choose to put further stipulations on your ascent as well, how they see fit. And as far as the anchoring system, this is something that was designed by the applicant, but in response to concerns of the robustness of his previous original design. But the applicant proposes that the helical anchors and chains will be left on the ocean floor to be retrieved in the fall. So however that affects your review of this application, I just wanted to bring that to light. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So I'll go to the council now for questions. And I see Dave Monte's hand up. Dave, would you like to ask a question?
I have two questions, and one is a point that I'd just like to make. But Katie, in the discussions to take the vote, and it was ultimately rejected, we heard Mr. Dodge testify that he fishes there and is aware of others. Can you elaborate on that, Katie? That point? Who actually fished there? Was it lobster pots, snail pots, as Mr. Dodge said, or were there other issues as well?
Thank you.
The fisheries that were mentioned were lobster, conch, and fish pots. That's what I was made aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And my second point is our charge as a council, and maybe other council members of the chair can correct me if I'm wrong, is to really determine whether or not the agricultural lease, if there's a conflict with wild harvest or not. And that is the privy of the council, and that is the sole privy of the council, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Dave. I was going to mention that as well. The natural resource concerns, as Jenny Kilburn spoke to, are reflected in a letter from the department that was submitted on this application. It was actually submitted almost a year ago, June of 2019. But it remains the department's position from a natural resource standpoint, and it is a letter of concern. And now tonight, it's the council's prerogative to offer a recommendation to the CRMC as to whether the council, the Fisheries Council, feels that this proposal is or is not consistent with other competing uses involved in the wild harvest fisheries. So, Dave, you really characterize it in terms of the issues that are the issue that's before the Fisheries Council tonight. So, thank you.
Bob, you still taking comments, or can I make a motion?
I do see other hands up, so let me first go through to see whether other members of the council have questions, and then we'll entertain a motion, and then we can have discussion on the motion. Chris Ryan, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Bob. So my question goes back to the comment from Mr. August about the length of anchor chain, and I don't recall the exact length, but I'm curious if perhaps Ben or someone can tell me what we know about that anchor chain, and is it there all the time? Somebody just said it would be retrieved from time to time, but I'm curious about number one, if it's going to lay on the bottom all the time. Is it going to be washing back and forth in a current or surf that's going to be causing degradation to the, as Mr. August stated, the benthic habitat on the bottom?
I'll give Ben a chance to respond. Ben, I guess there are two questions here. One is it accurate that there are some 1,200 feet of chain that would remain in the water? And if so, how long would that chain remain in the water over the course of a given year?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I don't have the length of the line on hand right now, but he's using the anchors, for the helical anchors to the flotation buoys will be chained. So much like a mooring tackle, that's how much chain will be there. And much like mooring tackle, the chain was presumably stored in the off season on the sea floor. He writes, helical anchorage chains will be left on the ocean floor to be retrieved in the fall. All the buoys and horizontal ropes will be removed April 30th. So this is reading from his alternative proposal. And this is perhaps a point to be made, is that that this is based on his alternative proposal. So the application that is front of the Marine Fisheries Council at this moment does not include this information. However, the Marine Fisheries Council's recommendations are heard by the council and certainly part of the record, and will be certainly duly noted in the staff report. So if the Marine Fisheries Council believes that if the applicant does or pursue, or if is approved for the use of helical anchors and chains, that those chains be treated in a way to minimize impacts to the fishery, however you see that fit. And like I said, I'm just trying to see if I can get an idea of how much chain there will be. Let me just bear with me a second, see if I can find a clear picture here. Yeah, so mean high water at this site is 29 feet. So from a helical anchor, I would expect at least that much, not more. And that's going to be three helical anchors per line. I don't know if you can see this. So that's the diagram of the line there. The three down lines from the buoys at the top, and the line where the kelp will be grown off the horizontal line. That's what he's proposing there. And the applicant does mention that this will be a phased installation. He's not going to go out there and fully occupy the 10 acres. And that he is on a kind of a staggered system. He was originally going to plan for 2 to 5 years until a full build out. Now he's expecting more than 15 years for a full build out of that 10-acre space. So just something to note there. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Chris, does that answer your question?
I have a better picture now. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Bob, a quick follow-up, and I really appreciated Dave's reminder that we are talking about conflicts with wild harvest, fisheries, and not other environmental impacts. But, I just am sure that Ben is aware that wild harvest fisheries are one thing, but there are other environmental impacts from these kinds of installations that I hope are being adequately considered. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a number of concerns raised about this project and the associated environmental impacts. That it could have.
Thank you.
Thank you for that exchange. I'll go to Dr. Rice next.
I wanted to make some comments on this. Is that the helical anchor systems are much less invasive than the block systems, the very, very heavy blocks. And we've had a history of the block systems moving around. And the helical anchor systems and the chains actually occupy considerably less area of the bottom than many of the blocks. You need a little bit of a longer chain, probably twice to 3 times the depth in terms of the length, in terms of chain length, in terms of mooring scope. The other comment, and this that I wanted to put in here, is that the kelp itself, there is a good deal of information about populations of kelp favoring fish habitat, fish reproduction, and the like. This is known from worldwide, and it's largely for that reason that I sent the review paper around when the sort of the additional letters were given to the packet, so that the council has that information as well. This is one of these things that any kind of sort of human intervention with the environment. There's often two sides of the discussion, sort of the environmental degradation, but there's also with certain types of farming where we're dealing with organisms, we're actually building up food chains as well. So I just wanted to just throw that out as informational.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. I'll go to Jason Jarvis next.
Yeah, Bob, this has been going on a while. As a matter of fact, I remember the town council meeting on this. I know the Westerly Town Council unanimously voted against it. I think part of what people are concerned about is, again, what Josiah had said. It's utilized by recreational and commercial. Matter of fact, the last bonita I caught for the year last year was caught there in November, so which was kind of strange. But I'm also concerned about a few things here, and I know others that have spoken to me about it. As a matter of fact, my phone's been blowing up for 3 days. It's the privatization of our ocean. We're already seeing it with wind farms. There's already legislation and executive orders being put in place to promote ocean finfish aquaculture, which in turn is going to be more privatization. So we start with a 10-acre kelp farm, and then we're going to have a 30-acre finfish farm, and then we're going to have a 50-acre farm somewhere else. And slowly but surely, most of us that have small vessels that are limited to where we fish are going to have nowhere to fish. And it's starting to get a little frightening because we have an administration in office that could care less about regulatory process and let us just push through all of these aquaculture farms. And again, don't get me wrong, I am not against aquaculture. As a matter of fact, I've worked on an oyster farm years back, and I understand aquaculture better than most. But again, it's an issue for me to see the privatization of any part of our ocean, which we're already losing day by day. And that's a big concern for a lot of people in Westwood. I mean, and the other end of that, anybody that's ever fished over there that knows Watch Hill Reef, Napatree Point, it gets really ugly. You know, you could set a 2-pot lobster trawl with 4-foot lobster pots, and guess what? They end up on the beach. Yeah, you walk down that beach November through April, and guess what? There's about 20 or 30 lobster pots, fish pots, you name it, washed up on that beach. It gets absolutely ugly over there. So those are some of the concerns that have been brought to me, and my own personal concerns. Again, this is where I fish. We have a limited area to fish. If I don't have to go to Block Island to fish, I don't want to. I'll stay close to home. But a lot of the concerns are, again, the privatization of our ocean. And I also think that there needs to be more vetting done with kelp farming. It's new. Is this going to be an owner-operator situation, or is this person going to be able to start a kelp farm, establish it, and then sell it or lease it? I mean, are these regs in place anywhere? Because those are some concerns already. I mean, I think that just recently went on with a leased area for wind farms off Virginia, where they spent $1 million and they haven't even put in a windmill yet, but whoever owned it just made, you know, I think $26 million and walked away. So I think a lot of things need to be vetted more thoroughly before we decide to start putting kelp farms, you know, down the beaches. I mean, this is one. Where's the next one going to go? Charlestown, Weekapaug? I think it's going to be an uphill battle, and not just, you know, from me. I mean, recreational guys are up in arms about it as well. It's utilized by multiple stakeholders, and so I'm done. I'm done venting now. Moving on.
Thank you, Jason. No, appreciate that input very much. Katie Egan, you're up.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jason just said about the vetting. But another concern I have now that he wants to move to the helical anchor system, he'll be running chains. So basically it'll make those 10 acres unusable year round because chains will be running across parallel to one another throughout all 10 acres and creating hangs if you're trap fishing there and you are, you know, get hung up in his chain. It's just a hazard. So you won't be able to fish there April through November if he's going to be running chains across the bottom like he says he is. Helical, it seems low profile, but when you're adding all this extra ground tackle, it just creates more of a hazard for anybody, any type of fishing, I guess, where you're utilizing the bottom. So that'll be just 10 acres that you won't be able to fish. That's all.
Thank you, Katie. We don't see any other hands up, so at this point, I'd like to look to the council, any member of the council who would like to make a motion on this. And I see Dave Monty and Andy D'Angelo's hands up. I assume this is for the purpose of making a motion. So
sure, I'll defer to Andy.
Okay, Andy, go. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that this application be denied for all the reasons that, like Jason talked about, and it just doesn't sound like it's a good situation for that area.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Seconded by Katie Egan. So moved by Andy D'Angelo and seconded by Katie Egan to recommend denial and to remind the council, this motion, if it were to pass, would be worded in the language that we have to word motions pertaining to aquaculture proposals. Namely that the council would find the proposal to be inconsistent with competing uses engaged in the exploitation of marine fisheries. So I just want to, and there it is on the screen. Thank you so much, Nicole. And it's exactly what I just said. The motion is to recommend to the director that this aquaculture lease application is not consistent with competing uses engaged in the exploitation of the marine fisheries in the area. I think it's implicit that we're talking about in this area. Moved by Mr. D'Angelo and seconded by Ms. Egan. Discussion on the motion by the council. Would any member of the council like to speak to the motion? Chris Ryan?
Yeah, I just feel like I wanted to add a little bit of discussion in response to particularly what Dr. Rice said. I have a strong affinity to seeing aquaculture be pursued in the right places, and I think there is a place for aquaculture in our fishing community. But in this particular instance, hearing comments made by others, seeing the location and the size of this particular proposal, I just don't know if this is the right place for that proposal. And so I just wanted to express that a little bit more clearly before we say yay or nay.
Yeah, I would,
Dave?
Bob, if I may, I appreciate Chris's comments. I really appreciated Dr. Rice, you sending that document around. I think that's very useful. We're very fortunate to have you on the council, so thank you. I also feel that there is a place for aquaculture, and I think that we do need it. I think that if there is a reason why I would not support this is because it is in conflict with wild harvest from multiple perspectives that we have heard, and not necessarily that that I don't want aquaculture. And I just want to make that clear. So I support the motion to deny it based on the fact that it's in conflict with natural wild harvest.
Thank you, Dave. Other members of the council wishing to comment on the motion before the council? If not, is the council ready for the question? If so, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monty,
So if I approve the motion where I'm approving to deny it, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
You're-
okay.
The motion, I just want to be clear because it's a very good point, Dave, and sometimes we do get spun around on these things, particularly when you have phrases like not consistent. But the motion in essence is a denial, but it's worded in the way it's worded to be consistent with the council's charge on this matter.
Correct. Approve.
Thank you.
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Abstain.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
and Chris Ryan.
Abstain.
Okay, I have that motion passing 5 in support, 0 in opposition with 2 abstentions. So the motion passes 5-0 with 2 abstentions. And we've completed our deliberation on this matter. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is area closures in Ninigret Pond Shellfish Management Area for oyster restoration and oyster harvest moratorium in the Bissel Cove, Fox Island Shellfish Management Area. John, if you can take a crack at summarizing this for the council, and then I'll look to Katie to review the SAP recommendation on this. John?
Yeah, sure. So this is a proposal by the division to re-up our shellfish enclosure for 2 areas of Foster Cove, the northern and the eastern area. The division has done extensive shellfish restoration work here with oysters, and the closure of it has expired as of December of this year. We are proposing to re-up it indefinitely. And once again, to be very clear, we are not proposing closing the entire Foster Cove, just the 2 discrete areas you see marked in red, which are surrounding some blue rectangles.
Thank you. Katie, this was reviewed by the Shellfish Advisory Panel. Can you summarize the panel's recommendation on this?
Sure. So the recommendation was to approve with hold on one second, with no sunset, so no sunset date like they're asking for. There was also talk about requiring disease studies, but ultimately to reinstate the program or the project, but without the but to continue to have a 5-year sunset closure like they've had in the past. This isn't the first time these projects have come up with the same. They've come to the staff with the same kind of request to get rid of the sunset clause. But so again, we're asking to keep the sunset clause just in case we don't want to lose these grounds forever, in case these projects don't go on forever. That's all.
Thank you. So if the Shellfish Advisory Panel is recommending that the closures be extended, but with a sunset date, I think if I understood what you said,
right?
Then go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that the council is clear on what the panel is recommending, and that is, I believe, in conflict with what the division is proposing, which is to just eliminate the sunset date. The panel, if I understand correctly, is not comfortable with that. They're comfortable with continuing the closure, but they'd like it to be to a date certain.
Correct. So it's as written, recommended to council to reestablish the closure and a 5-year sunset clause. In addition, the SAP requests ongoing oyster disease testing. So.
Thank you. So I think that clarifies the SAP recommendation. So now it's to the council for questions or comments. I see we have one member of the Shellfish Advisory Panel, Jeff Gardner, with his hand up. We'll go ahead and take that comment. Go ahead, Jeff. Can somebody unmute Jeff, who's looking to weigh in with his hand up? As soon as you're unmuted, Jeff, the floor will be yours. There you go.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm familiar with Foster's Cove. I've been visiting here since 1970. And I requested testing, as they do on my oyster farms, twice, 3 times a year. And their response was, no, we've never been charged with doing that. The numbers of what that has been going on there is it's gone from, I believe, 65 oysters per square meter when they do their measurements, all different sizes, down to 5. And it seems like a waste of the Park DEM's funding to continue these no sunset forever projects when there's other more important things that are in need. And that was my impetus that got the SAP to, I believe my impetus, to get the SAP to vote to not approve, to ask for a 5-year sunset, not forever. The same thing's going to come up with Bissel Cove. As you'll see as it goes on, they do disease testing there, but once again, they're looking for a forever clause, and it's a very large area that is used for other uses, and let's move on to other projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Dr. Rice, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea just to keep the sunset clause in there, just for review purposes, really seeing if the project is doing any good, whether there's justification for continuing the project and so forth. I think it's a pretty good idea to have the disease monitoring. I think that type of data on an ongoing basis is not only good for the shell fishery, but it's also good for the aquaculture industry as well, in terms of having a longitudinal study on these things, and it gives a good excuse, and it's a good worthwhile project.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? I see, no, that was Dr. Rice, he just spoke. Any other comments or questions from the council? Seeing none, would any member of the council like to make a motion on this matter?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
So just to reflect what the SAP recommendation was, hold on a second, I'm trying to bring it right up. To recommend the council, or to the director, to reestablish the closure and a 5-year sunset clause. In addition, request ongoing oyster disease testing.
Thanks. Let's see if we can get, thank you. I see Chris Ryan with his hand up. Chris, do you want to second that motion?
I do.
Thank you. So moved by Katie Egan and seconded by Chris Ryan to recommend the reestablishment of the closures with a 5-year sunset clause and with disease testing. I'm not sure that was perfectly worded. Now we see it perfectly worded. Motion to recommend to the director to reestablish closures in Foster Cove, Northern Oyster Reserve, and Eastern Oyster Reserve until January 1, 2025, with ongoing oyster disease testing. Motion by Ms. Egan and seconded by Mr. Ryan. Katie, is that motion consistent with what you are intending?
It is, yes.
Okay, 5 years has been interpreted to be January 1, 2025. It's 5.5, I guess, but, or no, I guess that maybe is 4.5. I don't know. I'd have to do my math. But anyway, that's the motion. And to me, that sounds like a round number, January 1, 2025. If you're, Katie, comfortable with that motion, that's what's before the council for just review and discussion and a vote momentarily. Would anyone on the council like to speak to the motion? Seeing no hands, I'll ask Nicole to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve.
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approve.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Motion passes unanimously 7-0. And thank you for that. Is there a part B here pertaining to Bissel Cove and Fox Island, John?
There is. So this is the second part of this. Once again, in Bissel Cove, Fox Island Shellfish Management Area, the division has been doing extension restoration work with oysters. This work is, it helps provide extra broodstock to enhance local populations. There is one distinct difference between this and Foster Cove. In this case, we are proposing to, well, first off, it has not expired yet. It expires November 15th, 2020. We are recommending that we extend this, but it is not a complete shellfishing closure. This is just a moratorium on the harvest of oysters.
Thank you. And it's apparent from the slide that there's a terrible red tide problem there, but that's a second another issue. Questions for John from the council? Seeing none, Katie, I think I'll look to you to see if there was a SAP recommendation on this.
Yep, the SAP recommendation was basically the same as the previous area, to recommend to the council to reestablish the closure and a 5-year sunset clause. In addition, the SAP requests ongoing oyster disease testing. So
thank you.
that would be the same, verbatim.
Thank you. Questions? Sounds like this is following a similar course as the prior issue. Is the council ready for the, well, would anyone like to, Katie, would you like to make a motion? Why don't we just kind of roll along and just.
Sure. I'd like to make a, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to reestablish the closure for and a 5-year sunset clause. In addition, request ongoing oyster disease testing.
Thank you. Motion made by Ms. Egan, seconded by Mr. Monty. And as soon as Nicole has that up on the board, I'll read it into the record, and then we'll call the question. So motion to recommend to the director to maintain current Bissel Cove Fox Island oyster harvest moratorium until November 15, 2025 with ongoing oyster disease testing. Motion made by Ms. Egan, seconded by Mr. Monty. Is there any further discussion on the motion by the council? Seeing no hands, I'll go to Nicole for the roll, to call the roll.
Dave Monte,
Approve.
Travis Barrow,
Yay.
Andy D'Angelo,
Approved.
Katie Egan,
Yay.
Dr. Rice,
Yay.
Jason Jarvis,
Yay.
Chris Ryan.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously 7-0. So that completes that agenda item. Our next, and we're nearing the end of the meeting, but we've got some interesting issues to just discuss. No further voting. Great meeting so far, by the way. Thank you all for your undivided attention. We got through a lot there. So item 10 is titled COVID-19 Fisheries Response. Jason McNamee, who I believe is on this call, is going to tag team with me on this one. And this is just an opportunity to very briefly provide the council with an overview of the multiple efforts that have been underway since the crisis struck, which was ironically very shortly after the last council meeting. So by the second week in March, we were in full response mode. And there were so many initiatives and actions undertaken over the past 2 months. It's actually challenging to characterize and summarize them all briefly, but I'll do my best. And I'm just going to tick them off. The point being to just kind of alert the council to all that's been going on. Much of this I think you're aware of. And then I'm going to, at the end, we're going to talk a bit about the disaster assistance program. And that's where I'm going to turn to Jason. What I'll do is I'll just tick off some of the key initiatives and efforts that have been undertaken over the past couple months by DEM, often working closely with colleagues in the Division of Agriculture and the Department of Health, as well as other agencies, and in close coordination with our federal partners, particularly our congressional delegation. We've been having regular conference calls with industry to identify and address priority needs and interests. Our next call happens to be this Wednesday at 2 p.m. I think a lot of you have been on those calls, but they're open and a good opportunity to work through issues of priority concern to the industry. And by industry, I mean commercial, recreational, for hire, shellfish, farm, the aquaculture community, basically all of the marine fishing industry and seafood industry in Rhode Island. So we've been having regular conference calls. We've developed safety protocols for the commercial fishery. That was done in close coordination with the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island. We have the director deferred quarterly payments for berth holders and leaseholders in Galilee to provide them with a bit of financial relief. There were adjustments made to the summer flounder aggregate program for the winter 1 sub-period to better accommodate the needs of that fishery, given the upended market that occurred with regard to fluke. There was a direct sale dealer license enacted by the director via emergency regulation, and a follow-up to that was an alignment of that program with Pier 9 in Newport. And that's a program that has actually become quite popular in a relatively short amount of time. I think we've got close to 100 licenses that have been issued. But because that was enacted via an emergency regulation, it has a 120-day, it can only run for 120 days, which would be through mid-August. It can then be extended by the director once for 60 days, but that would be it. So between now and August, September, that sort of time frame, this is an issue that will likely be coming before the full council, this council, for review as a permanent program. Right now, it's an interim program enacted via emergency regulation, but it does provide commercial fishermen with the opportunity to sell their harvest directly to consumers and retailers. We've also developed, the department has also developed guidance for direct sales of shellfish, guidance for the for-hire industry to help get them back up and running. There has been an initiative undertaken to enable seafood donations. That's a cooperative program with the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island and the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. And then last but not least, there's been coordination on a variety of federal assistance programs, including those run through the Small Business Administration, or SBA, and unemployment insurance through the Department of Labor and Training. We've had some sessions with representatives from those two agencies, briefing fishermen as part of our weekly conference calls. And then the Fisheries Disaster Assistance Program, this is where I'm going to turn it over to Jason. So if he's not already unmuted, if staff could unmute Jason, I'm going to give Jason McNamee the opportunity now to just speak to the department's, the divisions, I guess it's the department's plan to move forward with the administration of the Federal Fisheries Disaster Assistance. Jason?
Yep, thanks, Bob. And just before I get started, hi everyone, and good job Zooming. The meeting's going pretty well, so nice job. In the CARES Act that came out, I guess a couple months ago now, there was a little piece of that specifically for fisheries assistance was $300 million. That $300 million was for the entire country, coastal country, I guess. And just a couple weeks ago, we finally got the allocation. So we finally found out what Rhode Island was going to get out of that 300 million. That answer was about 3.2 million is coming to Rhode Island. And so as all this was getting sorted out, what we did at DEM was we pulled together first an internal working team, a working group rather, a team that is trying to figure out what exactly the parameters are on this money. We're trying to get information from NOAA. In fact, I had a call right before this meeting started with NOAA officials, again, trying to get additional information still at this point as to how they came up with 3.2 million for Rhode Island. And so we're trying to pull all of the pieces together so that we can then start our process here in Rhode Island to talk to the stakeholders about our plan for how we're going to get this money out to you all, to the fishing stakeholders. I won't get into the gory details yet. We're going to do a little bit more of a detailed discussion on the stakeholder call that Bob mentioned a moment ago on Wednesday afternoon. And then we'll start to do a series of topic-specific Zoom meeting so that we can start to interact with you all. And just so you know, we're going to work as quickly as we can to get this money out. But some of these things are in our control and some of them aren't. And we'll try and itemize that stuff out for you so you have an understanding of, where we can move quicker and what areas are going to hold us up. But we're trying to slog through it all. We'll have more details Wednesday afternoon, and then we'll start having, more calls that'll be topic specific just about the fisheries disaster relief after that. So I guess I'll pause there. Actually, if you don't mind, Bob, while I have the floor, I wanted to make a comment about the direct sales license. So this has really been an awesome development. I think, it's something that we've talked about for years and years, and we've been able to finally get it operationalized. We want to, bring it back forward to make it a permanent program, but what I wanted to bring up is the reporting has been abysmal. We need your help. Anyone that has these licenses, you have to really make them understand how important that aspect is of this to make this a successful program that we can keep forward with. We need your help. We need people to report and be responsible on that aspect of it. So I just wanted to take the opportunity while I had the floor to just make people aware that we are having some issues with reporting compliance with that program. So with that, I'll take a pause. Happy to answer any questions. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, tonight, just because it's getting late already. But there'll be lots of opportunities moving forward to talk through the disaster relief. But any quick questions, happy to answer those.
Great, thanks, Jason. So this is an open forum opportunity for any member of the council to offer any comment or ask any questions regarding any of the COVID-19 response initiatives that the department has been undertaking. I do see a hand up from a member of the public. I'll go to Cameron Enos first. So if staff could unmute Cameron Enos, I'll offer him the floor. Hang on one second. There you go, Cameron, you're on.
Hi, Jason.
Yep.
My name's Cam. I'm the Executive Director of Ocean State Aquaculture Association, and we've been working with Julia to provide you with the data that you need. And we're looking forward to working with you because we got shut out of USDA CFAP, and this time of year, we all need seed money. So I just wanted to put that on your radar, that seed costs in the aquaculture industry are pretty high and we don't have any revenue. And 3.24 million is not a lot to be dispersed through all the loss, through all the fisheries. And I know that's a difficult task, but I just wanted to put you on our radar and let you know that we're trying to solve this problem 3% at a time as well.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Maybe I will add that detail, which I think you know already, but aquaculture, marine aquaculture is clearly one of the sectors that is eligible for this disaster relief, as is commercial fishing, seafood processing, and party and charter. So those are kind of the four major categories that qualify for this relief. We appreciate your help, and Julia is the perfect contact to work with on getting us that data, and we'll be working. We've already met several times internally to start to develop our plan, so we hope to start unrolling that stuff pretty quickly here.
Thank you. And Julia's been great so far, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
I agree with Julia's greatness.
Thank you, Cam, for your input and your excellent representation of the aquaculture industry. Josiah Dodge, I see your hand up. If staff could unmute Josiah, I'll give him the floor. Go ahead, Josiah.
Hey, random question. Any chance we could use some of that funding to, like, I don't know, maybe get like the non-existent westerly fishery, some municipal output down here? I mean, we have zero infrastructure. We're like wasteland fishing. And it's been brought up a million times before, and I know the answer is probably not going to happen, but there's 34 people that fish commercially in the town of Westerly, yet we have zero commercial infrastructure. Any chance at all DEM could use some of that funding to, like, maybe throw us a bone, like maybe a cooler ice even? No, seriously though, like, we need help down here with this stuff, man. There's a few of us that are spearheading it with the private industry help that we have, but it's a losing battle. I mean, we need a place to tie up. We need a place to fish, to be able to land fish. It's you can only expect people in boatyards to allow you to do it for so long before the guys start really pissing and moaning. So I guess my question is there any chance that some of this funding could be used to do something in the realm of infrastructure down here for us?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Josiah. So just, to that point, I think this money is your money. This is the fishermen's money. We're going to do our best to get it out to you as quickly as possible. I think bigger initiatives are totally something that we could do. However, just to be forthright, you're going to be competing with people just wanting to get a check. So those are like the different ways that this money could roll out. And so that's what the stakeholder process will be about, though, for you to sort of offer. If you guys have a plan, an idea, bring that forward, and we'll vet those with the fishing industry.
Thanks, Josiah, for that question, and Jay for the answer. Anyone else on the council or anyone else participating in this meeting who would like to offer a comment at all at this point? Seeing no hands, thank you. We have just 2 items left on the agenda. The next is an FYI item, and it's back to Jason for an update on licensing legislation and the Tautog CE proposal. Jay?
Yep, thanks, Bob. So we just wanted to, I'll be quick. So with the Tautog CE proposal, the reason why I asked Pete to add that to this agenda was we had talked about it. It came up during one of your meetings. I don't know if it was the last one or the one before that. And we had committed to putting forward a conservation equivalency proposal for the recreational Tautog fisheries, specifically for the party and charter folks. When we developed the regional plan for Tautog with Massachusetts, we lost a fish out of our bag limit in the fall. We used to have 6 fish and now we're down to 5. And so what I wanted to do is just update you. Nicole Aries from Marine Fisheries did all the work, developed the conservation equivalency, vetted it with the technical folks, and then it went in front of the ASMFC at their last meeting. And just to cut to the chase, we did not prevail. The council did not approve that conservation equivalency. And so I just wanted to update you on that. That's why it wasn't on your last public hearing and why you won't see it again this year. They didn't completely close the door. I think there was some folks that offered, that I can't remember exactly what they wanted to see, but they offered that, they weren't shutting the door on it forever. If we wanted to bring it forward again with some modifications, we could do that. But I just wanted you to know where that ended up as far as this year goes. And so you won't see that again this year. And then the other thing is on the licensing legislation. We talked to you about that a couple meetings ago. And again, just to kind of cut to the chase with everything that's going on, the legislature hasn't been in session. They just recently went back with some committee meetings, but the licensing legislation, we haven't heard anything about it. Given the stress that the industry is under right now, I don't know if we will be inclined or if the legislature will be inclined to bring that back. So I just wanted to give you an update that we had brought that legislation into the process, and then given everything that's transpired since then, I really don't know what's going to happen with that for this year, if anything comes of it, because it is now in the realm of the legislature. If it comes back up, we'll be sure to reconnect with you, but we've not heard anything about it. And given all of the stress that the industry's been under, I don't know that there will be a desire to bring that back in this session. So that's all I have to say about that stuff. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Jay. I see Josiah Dodge with your hand up. Go ahead, Josiah. Wait, there you go. Go ahead.
Hi, Bob. This is something I want you to pay attention to specifically also, and this is to Jason, and Jason's going to hate me for this. I'm sorry, Jason McNamee, but licensing was brought up. I tried to get my hand up earlier during the Jonah crab discussion to bring this up also. We need to address the history issue not transferring with licenses in the state of Rhode Island. The reason I say this is fluke has a control date on it, December 31st, 2010. If you didn't catch a fluke before that date on your license, you are not eligible to participate in the fishery if it were to be enacted, as it has not been enacted on yet. However, the Jonah crab has. Here's the problem. When you sell a federal permit, you get the history with the permit unless it's written otherwise. There's an actual federal process written in for this, because when they first started the transferring of history and selling off permits and stuff, they didn't have it written in, and they had to double issue permits with history because it was like a gray area. Now, Rhode Island, I learned this last year when I bought my multi-purpose. You go in, you transfer your license, and you start from a clean slate. There is no history on your license. If you have lobster allocation, that was with the old license, they transferred over. If you have a gillnet endorsement and it shows and you bought your tags, it transfers over. But as far as like the history of landing, that goes away. Now, here's the problem. Rhode Island wants young people involved in the fisheries, correct, Bob?
Yes.
However, who's going to get involved if they can't make a living because they can't catch fluke? Put a control date on sea bass, they can't catch that. Put a control date on Jonah crab, they can't catch that. And I understand the reasons for the Jonah crab fishery control date and every control date. However, as these people retire out and they transfer their licenses, their history goes away. Therefore, it's locking out the new entrant into the fishery to the fisheries. This needs to be addressed. I'll tell you right now, if they enact that fluke control date, I'm screwed. A number of people I know are screwed that have gotten their license after 2010. This is a problem. There's got to be a solution to come up with this. I've been bringing it up and bringing it up and bringing it up, and Jason McNamee and myself have spoken about this before, and he admitted that it's more of a process than a regulatory thing and whatnot. But at the end of the day, this really needs to be addressed and fixed like soon, because if it's not, nobody's going to be able to fish in the state of Rhode Island under their licenses once they retire out and the new people start. And that's really not good. So this is the first time I've actually been involved with a council meeting where I've wanted to bring this up and had the chance to.
Yeah, Bob, if you don't mind, I can make a quick response. So Josiah, totally fair thing to bring up. And in fact, I think you have compelled us, I believe we have it in our regulatory regulatory queue. So it is in internal discussion now. And so I shouldn't speak out of turn here. I'm not sure exactly which process it will enter into, but it could be coming up as early as the licensing process this fall. So we have heard you, and we are discussing it and trying to figure out ways to address this issue. So
yeah, it'd be really helpful because, like, I know with me now, it's you know, now that the history on the old license is gone, that there's no way to really figure anything out, you know. And if you're trying to get younger people involved, but it's scary because nobody wants to make a big jump into an industry and then find out, hey, you can't do this. It's financially like a big hardship at that point, you know?
Yep.
So,
yep, that's fair.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for that input, Josiah. Dr. Rice, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I actually wanted to put forth a motion, and the motion to the effect that to request of the department and the division to explore the idea of and a mechanism to attach such histories to the licenses, and bring forth some sort of proposal to a future meeting of the council.
So because this wasn't really, well, okay, I'll entertain that as a motion. I think it would probably be best to kind of a sense of the council to support what Jason just indicated, which is the direction the department is already moving in. But if you'd like to make it a formal motion, Dr. Rice, I'll entertain it as such. We typically don't do that under FYI issues that we haven't noticed. But this is just a recommendation to the department. And so if you would like to make that motion, which I think you just did,
as a recommendation, yes.
As a recommendation. And is there a second to Dr. Rice's motion? Would anyone like to second that motion to recommend?
I will, Bob.
Okay, actually, Jason Jarvis got his hand up a little sooner. I'm going to give Jason the second on this one. So a motion made and seconded to recommend to the department that the division move forward with the exploration of a mechanism to attach history to licenses. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any opposition? Well, Josiah, you've already had a chance. I want to kind of wrap this meeting up if you don't mind. Thank you. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing no hands, the motion passes unanimously by consent, and with Jason on the call and with other staff on the call, that we'll take that to heart and report back to the council probably relatively soon if it is incorporated into the licensing queue for the next round. So we're on to, so thank you for that. Are there any other questions or discussion on this agenda item? Seeing none, I think we're on to really the last or second to last. We're going to talk about our final meeting as the final piece. But Katie had asked to add on here under new business well, I'll just let you take the floor, Katie. It has to do with the Shellfish Advisory Panel's review process for aquaculture lease proposals. Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, so it's been brought to my attention at the last 4 or 5 SAP meetings, and at the last council meeting it was brought up that there are concerns with the growing number of aquaculture farms around the bay. The size and scope of these farms is increasing drastically. I don't know if the council, I'm sure the council members all saw, but they just approved, 15 acres right next to each other on the west side of Jamestown, along with 3 other farms within a couple miles of that area. So they're densely packed together with thousands of floating cages. Floating cages are the new, are becoming increasingly popular. So one of the farms was 12,000 cages. Well, it seems like a lot. They're pretty small, but it's just the size and scope of these farms and these projects is getting to be very big. So the SAP members just don't feel adequately informed about these applications. And when the coordinator is reporting, they're usually hearing this information for the first time at the meeting. And they don't feel like they have enough time or resources to cast a thoughtful and informed vote. Basically, releasing public waters for private use, and on many occasions, displacing fishermen from historic fishing grounds. These conflicts are continuing to build, and with it, a distrust in the process. I'd like the council to think about ways to ameliorate this problem. I would like to have a discussion at the next SAP meeting, inviting CRMC and DEM to develop new ways to go about this process. We have a new aquaculture coordinator from CRMC at the helm, and I think this is a good time to come up with new protocols for this process. So if anybody has any ideas or thoughts about ways we can all work on this together, I mean, there is a place for aquaculture. I think it's a great opportunity for this, for the state, and it's in the right areas. It's great, but a lot of times there's a lot of confusion and misinformation, and I'd like to kind of clear a lot of that up. So if there's anybody has any ideas of ways to kind of streamline this process, just please let me know. So next steps will be to have it on the SAP agenda for the next SAP meeting, whenever that is, and then hopefully we'll have something to bring to council. So that's all I have.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your leadership on this and for bringing this forward. So the suggestion to the council, again, this is not an action item because it wasn't noticed on the agenda. So it would not be appropriate to take motions on this. It would just be to see if the council conceptually supports Katie's proposal to have the SAP, the Shellfish Advisory Panel, take this up as an agenda item at their next meeting and then report back to the full council. And the suggestion, I think it's a good one, is to do this in close coordination with the CRMC, particularly given their new aquaculture coordinator, who we had the pleasure of meeting tonight, Bycatch, and of course DEM staff would be involved in this as well. Discussion on Katie's idea. I see Jeff Gardner with his hand up. If staff could unmute Jeff, we'll give Jeff a chance to offer a comment. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hello to everybody. I'm a member of the SAP, been for a long time. I might be the oldest leaseholder, either in age or the age of my lease, which I believe is 1993. There's a couple of parts, there's more than a couple of parts to this. One is our organization, etc., would like to see more than one member on the SAP, considering I believe we're bringing in more revenue than the wild harvesters at this point, and I'm the only person representing aquaculture. I've always had a difficulty trying to present the industry's views versus my own views. I think DM and everybody has done a very good job with the coastal ponds with the 5% limit on aquaculture, but that seems to have kind of, and I'm going to be wrong by a lot of people what I'm saying here, It hasn't happened in Narragansett Bay. And why? I've never been really sure. I'm a South County Westerly Winnebago Pond guy. But I'll give you an example. I have 12-acre lease. I started with 1.5 acres. DEM biologist, Arcades, prove it. I proved it. I got 3 acres. Prove it. I got 4.5 acres. Prove it. I got 6. And then I believe I finally got 12. It was a multi-stage, process. Now people go in. Hi, I'm me. I want to go in Narragansett Bay. Some of these people are they're very good at what they've done. Their industry. But then other people, I don't know what I'm supposed to do when somebody comes in. Hi, I'm new. I'd like to have a big, as Katie was saying, this fairly large acreage because I want it. Is it a gold rush? Is there a process? It's been asked by the wild harvesters, etc. The people who are waterfront that they're rich, they're lawyers, and blah, blah. What's the control on this? And I'm representing industry, so I'm not the one that's supposed to be controlling this, but it does seem a little bit like the Wild West at times. And are we supposed to be, for me, I represent industry, so industry participants I'm going to endorse, but then we have the worry about, are they going to do the right thing with handling their shellfish? Are they going to leave a mess? What's going on? And there is no bay plan. It's been talked about. It's an expensive venture, controversial. I've been on committees for 30 years, and it's not completed yet. And sometimes there's a lot of little holes in the wall that people fall through. Next thing you know, they're in front of somebody's house. This needs to be addressed. It's been a long process of a problem for a long time. And hopefully Katie's request will get some motion on this because it needs some traction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Dave Monty next. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, how does this dovetail? I know that Coastal Resources was thinking about or is in the process of, and I know recreational fishing has been advocating for this, and that is a revised SAMP plan for Narragansett Bay that might address some of these issues. I know that recreational anglers are concerned as well and have urged CRMC to sort of do this. And I'm not sure, I think it's underway but I'm not quite sure. But you would think that you would look at the whole picture as you move forward, just as we did with the ocean floor. So,
yep, that's a great suggestion, and it seems to me that would be something that Katie and the SAP may want to entertain. And it was brought forward, as I remember, at one of our recent meetings by Jody King, who essentially urged that same suggestion. So good point. I see Cam Enos has his hand up. There, you're unmuted, Cam. Go ahead.
Hi, Katie. I think the addition to SAP this evening was great. He seems like a young, invested person, and young blood and new perspective is awesome for the committee. But I was advised that OSA's application for additional members would be received in October. And I don't want to belittle this great addition to SAP, but I just want to ask that I can help in any way to provide reasonable notice and clear expectations for every party when reviewing these applications. And I think it's a great suggestion, and I'd love to help if I can.
Thanks so much, Cam. We really appreciate your input and involvement. Any other discussion on this? Sounds like we've got a good amount of momentum building for an aquaculture initiative that the SAP would undertake in close coordination with the CRMC and the Ocean State Aquaculture Association, with a report back to the council at perhaps the next council meeting. That's the sense I get as to the direction this is going. Any other comments or questions? Is there any opposition to this proposal that Katie has brought forward on behalf of the SAP? Seeing no hands, Katie, it sounds like you've got the green light to go ahead and work on this. obviously coordinating with Anna and Steph at DEM to kind of help pull it all together. And do you have what you need? Do you feel comfortable moving forward at this point? Oh, I think my screen froze. I have been frozen out of this meeting. Oh, wait, no.
You're good. Yeah, you sound good here.
Oh, okay. Katie's frozen, so it's actually kind of funny. It's perfect at the end of the meeting to see something like this happen. So for whatever reason, Katie's video froze, but I can tell by her expression that she's fully in support of what we just discussed. So I'm going to just go ahead and say thank you. We have reached the end of the agenda. Is there any other business that anyone would like to bring forward? I know Pete just wanted to talk briefly about the next meeting. Pete, are you on, and do you want to address the next meeting?
Yeah, sure, Bob. Definitely another meeting in October. That's our usual cycle. We have our normal cycle of bringing commercial licensing matters to hearing in September. We'll have a workshop. I'll listserv that soon, starting in June, to start to tell folks what we have in our queue and to solicit any new proposals. So that's our normal September hearing, October cycle. If the emergency regulations for the direct sale dealer license, if that's to be maintained seamlessly, then we may need to meet in September.
Great, thanks so much. And right on cue, my water boiler just kicked on. So if you're hearing background noise, that's what's happening here. But I think the gods are telling us something, and that is we should end this meeting. So unless there's any objection, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I do want to say one thing, though, very sincerely, and that is the awesome job that DEM Marine Fisheries staff did in getting this meeting organized. Nicole and John in particular.
Absolutely.
Put an enormous amount of effort into making this run smoothly, and I think they're getting a 5-star rating from me on their performance. I don't know how they do it. There's so many knobs to be turning here, but they did an awesome job. Thank you. I think we're all saying
thank you,
and that is thank you, Nicole and John and Pete and the whole staff. We're adjourned. Have a good night, and we'll stay in touch. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.